Being Nobody, Going Nowhere by Ayya Khema. Chapter 3, of 13. Calm and Insight. There are many different meditation techniques. In the path of purification, 40 of them are mentioned, but there are only two streams, two directions, and these are the two directions one has to take, calm and insight. They work hand in hand. Unless we know the direction we're going, it's highly unlikely that we'll get to our destination. We have to know which way to go. Both directions, calm and insight, need to be practiced in order to obtain the results that meditation can bring. Most people want calm. Everybody's looking for some peace, for that feeling of blissful contentment. If they can get a glimpse of it in meditation, they're quite happy and try to get more of it. With a fair bit of it, many would be contented and satisfied with that alone. But that's not what meditation is designed to do. It's a means to an end. Calm is the means. Insight is the end. The means are essential and necessary, but they must never be confused with the end. And yet, because it's so entirely pleasant, a new attachment arises. It is our constant difficulty that we want to keep what is pleasant and reject what is unpleasant. Because we make that our purpose in life, our life really has no purpose. It's impossible to get rid of everything unpleasant and to keep everything that's pleasant. As long as we have that as our direction, we have no direction. The same applies to meditation. So how are we going to obtain some calm, and what does it actually do for us? By keeping the attention on the breath, there will be some calm eventually. The mind may stop thinking for a moment and will really feel quite at ease. A mind that is thinking is never at ease because thinking is a process of movement, and movement has irritation in it. But there may come a moment of ease and we may be able to prolong that moment, and as we practice longer. FFI. Fithara is no reason why we can't do it. It's not that difficult. It may seem difficult in the beginning, but all that is needed is patience, determination, a bit of good Khema, see chapter 7, and a quiet place. We must all have a bit of good Khema, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here. People who make a lot of bad Khema don't usually come to a meditation retreat, and if they should come, they don't stay. So the good Khema is already there. As to patience, we are more or less forced into that by remaining here. One thing you'll have to add to that, the one ingredient needed for this mixture, is determination. When you first sit down, make a resolution, I'm really going to stay on the breath now, and every time I slip, I'm going to come back. It's a balancing act, like walking on a tightrope. Each time you slip, you have to bring yourself back onto it. So determination is needed. When that calm and pleasant feeling arises, the feeling the Buddha called a pleasant abiding, and then disappears again, which it must, because whatever has arisen will disappear. The first reaction that has to come to mind is knowing the impermanence, not, oh dear, it's gone again, or that was nice. How am I going to get it back? Which is the usual way of reacting. Living according to Dhamma, experiencing according to Dhamma, is an unusual way. It's the other way around from what the crowd does. It's an individual understanding. When the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, before his enlightenment, Sujata brought him milk rice in a golden bowl and said he could also have the golden bowl. The Buddha threw the bowl into the river behind him and said that if it swam upstream against the current, he'd become enlightened. And of course it did. Can a golden bowl swim upstream? What this story means is that when we live according to Dhamma, we have to go against the current of our natural instincts and inclinations. We have to go against what is easy, comfortable, and done by everyone. It's much more difficult to go against the stream than to go with the current. The pleasant abiding, the pleasant feeling, which is first physical then also emotional, first it's pleasure in the body, then it's pleasure and happiness in the emotions, then it can become very, very peaceful. That, too, has to vanish again. We must see its impermanence, and only then are we using this pleasant abiding for a purpose. If we don't see the impermanence, we are using it only for our own comfort. What we are using for our own comfort is self-directed and not directed to losing self, which is the essence of the Buddha's teachings. The whole of the Buddha's teachings are directed toward losing self. He said, "There is only one thing I teach and ff. That is suering and its end to reach." But that doesn't mean that suering in the world is going to stop. It means ff. That if there's nobody here to react to suering, there is no suering. Self will stop. If there's nobody here to have a problem, how can there be a problem? Having pleasant abiding for one's own comfort, one goes in the wrong direction. Going back to the breath again and again will lead us toward the attainment of calm. The eighth step on the Noble Eightfold Path, right concentration, means meditative absorption. Trying to stay on the breath will lead us in that direction, but nobody goes into the meditative absorptions by wishing to do so or by just sitting down in meditation once or twice. It takes time. So all that arises while trying to stay on the breath needs to be used for insight. Any thought that arises is not a bothersome intruder, nor an indication that one isn't suitable for meditation, nor that it's too hot, or too cold, or too uncomfortable, or too late, or too early. None of that. Thought is not an intruder trying to bother us. It's a teacher to teach us. In the final analysis, we are all our own teachers and our own pupils, and that is as it should be. But we need to know what to look at in order to be taught by it. Each thought is a teacher. First of all, it teaches us about the unruliness of our mind, that our mind is not reliable and dependable. It thinks thoughts we don't even want to think, when we would much rather be totally calm and collected. The first thing we can learn about our mind is that it isn't such a wonderful part of us as we might have imagined just because we have learned, can remember, and can understand certain facts and concepts. It is an unruly, unreliable mind, not doing what we want it to do. The second thing to understand is that we don't have to believe our mind. We don't have to believe all these thoughts that come up. They have come without our invitation, and they'll go away again by themselves. They have little purpose, especially during meditation. Some of them might be 20 years old. Some of them might be pure fantasy. Some might be rather unpleasant, and some might be dreams. Some might be like will-o'-the-wisps that won't even appear properly. They all come so quickly that there's hardly time to label them. So why believe all the stuff that one usually thinks? In meditation we have the opportunity to get to know the mind the thinking that's going on and learn not to get involved in it. Likewise, why should we believe and get involved in all that thinking that occurs in everyday life? We believe it when our mind says, "This man is awful," or "This woman is a liar." We believe it when our mind says, "I'm so frustrated. I'm so bored," or "I have to get that thing," or "I have to go to that place." We believe it all but why should we? It's exactly the same process in meditation. Thoughts arise, stay a moment, and cease again with no rhyme or reason. The first time we can really grasp this, we'll actually be able to change a thought that's in the mind to one that we would like to have. That's what can be done when we don't believe what the mind says any longer, but just observe its thought processes. It's the same with this air around us. We don't grab hold of it and say it's ours, and yet if it wasn't there we couldn't live. It's just there. Thoughts are like that. The thinking process is natural to the mind, and because we are alive the thinking process goes on and on, but it's neither reliable nor believable. On the contrary, most of the thoughts the mind produces would be much better dropped. There is something else we can learn about our mind. When we sit in meditation and the concentration doesn't happen but the thinking does, when we feel drowsy, or there is lack of attention, then we can learn this about ourselves, that without having some entertainment in the mind, we go to sleep. The mind wants to be entertained. It wants to read a book, watch television, visit the neighbors, do some work, anything to be occupied and entertained. It cannot be happy and contented just on its own. This is an interesting new bit of understanding about oneself. Imagine being in an empty room by yourself for a week, just you. People consider this dreadful punishment, and it is, because the mind can't handle it. It wants to be fed all the time. Just as the body wants to be fed, the mind does too. It needs input because it's not content with itself. This is another important new revelation about ourselves that we get when we sit in meditation. Thoughts are very impermanent. They arise and they go, they don't stay just like the breath. If you pay good attention, you may be able to notice their arising. You certainly notice their vanishing, that is easy to see, the arising is a little more difficult. But you can't keep any of those thoughts, can you? They are gone, aren't they? All the thoughts that you have had during the past hour, all have disappeared, haven't they? Impermanence and non-ownership, you don't really want to own all these thoughts, do you? They're not really worth it, are they? There are hardly any that would be worthwhile, so why try to own them? Why try to think, this is me? Why not see that they are just a natural arising and vanishing, that's all? Similarly, with this body is it really me? It's a natural arising through conception and vanishing through death, a law of nature, a fact of nature, which our ego conceit does not allow us to grasp. Ego conceit does not necessarily mean that we are conceited people. Ego conceit means that we are not enlightened. Conceit has been eliminated only in arrogance. It means that we are seeing the world and ourselves from the standpoint of me, and when we do, the world is often threatening and so are other people, because me is fragile and can be easily hurt and toppled. All our thoughts that arise in meditation will give us an insight into ourselves, into the impermanence of this phenomenon of body and mind, into the non-ownership of it. If we really owned our thoughts, why wouldn't we own something that was worth having? Nobody likes to own rubbish. All of us try to make our possessions worthwhile. In meditation, the thoughts are found to be not worthwhile. The third aspect we can learn from all that thinking is that this is dukkha. Dukkha doesn't only mean suffering, it also means unsatisfactoriness, which is a much wider term and embraces everything we experience, even the most pleasant things, which we experience as unsatisfactory because of their impermanence. The unsatisfactoriness of our thinking process becomes very, very clear during meditation, because we actually want to concentrate, and yet here we are sitting and thinking. We gain insight into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self through personal experience. Nobody knows these three unless they have seen them for themselves. They are very nice words, which most of you may be familiar with, but you need to realize them through direct inner knowledge. Although we experience them every single moment, we're not usually paying enough attention. We are also dying every single moment, but we don't pay attention to that either. It takes precise mindfulness, which we are trying to learn through the meditation process. Look carefully and see the unsatisfactoriness of the thinking process as its inherent quality. We can all experience reality the way things really are if we expand our awareness to the point where we can actually see it. We are experiencing exactly what the Buddha talked about, but we have to penetrate its meaning. It's no use sitting there and thinking, I wish I weren't thinking, or I wish I could concentrate, or I wish it weren't so difficult, or I wish my right leg wouldn't hurt so much. Those are dreams. Those are hopes. We can't afford to dream and hope if we want to get to the bottom of what ails us. The Buddha said that we are all sick and that the Dhamma is the medicine. He was sometimes called the great physician. But just as with any medicine, it is of no use just knowing about it or merely reading the label. Reading the label is what's been done for so many thousands of years now. Let's stop reading the label and swallow the pill. It's not so difficult once we know the difference. When unpleasant feelings arise from sitting in one position, the mind immediately rejects and resists that. The mind immediately says, I don't like it. This is most unpleasant. I'm not going to last 10 days. I need a chair, or why sit like this? It's silly, or it's not worth it. Meditation can't be worth all this discomfort, or whatever else the mind tries to tell us. It has the ability to tell us anything. It can talk about any subject and it can see any side of the subject. It's an accepted debating technique to talk first about the advantages of a subject and then turn around and debate its contrary aspects. Any mind can do it. Our minds can slip this way and that. Don't sit there and think, I don't like this, my right leg, or my back, or my neck dash or whatever it may be dash is very uncomfortable. No. Use the arising of feeling as another way to insight. Feeling is our basis for living. The way we react comes through the contact we make through our senses. We see, we hear, we taste, we smell, we touch, and, of course, we also think. The Buddha talked about the mind, the thinking process, as the sixth sense. We also sometimes refer to our thoughts as the objects of a sixth sense. If we were blind, for instance, the world would appear deerently to us. If we were deaf, our world would be deerent again. The same holds with all the other senses. But here we have all our senses intact, we are making contact through them, and from that contact come feelings. That cannot be helped. We can't help but make contact. An arahant also has feelings three kinds: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Everybody has them. The neutral ones are those we are not aware of because we're not attentive enough. We haven't gotten enough yet. But we are certainly aware of the pleasant feelings and we revel in them and try to devise ways and means of keeping them. The whole economy of this globe of ours is geared toward creating pleasant feelings and making people want more of them. If everybody were to reject this, most of the economy would collapse. Pleasant feelings are induced by fans, refrigerators, hot water, cold water, different kinds of food, better mattresses, and all the rest of it. Feelings, everybody has them: pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. They arise in quick succession. Most people spend their life trying to hold on to the pleasant feelings and get rid of the unpleasant ones. We are fighting a lost cause. It's impossible. Nobody can keep the pleasant feelings. Nobody can permanently get rid of the unpleasant ones. As one gets older, as some of you may have noticed, the body has more unpleasant feelings than it used to have. Nobody is exempt. It's the law of nature. Death is certain and very often connected with very unpleasant feelings. But these unpleasant feelings are not confined to old age and death. The youngest, strongest people have unpleasant physical feelings and unpleasant emotional feelings. If we resolve to keep still for a moment, finally to take a look, to no longer run away from the unpleasant and no longer grasp at the pleasant, maybe for just one meditation session, we will have learned an enormous amount about ourselves. Watching the unpleasant feelings that arise while sitting, and for most people this happens, is another way to insight into one's own reactions. One wants to change the feeling, wants to get away from it. There is a spontaneous, impetuous reaction to the unpleasant feeling by moving to get rid of it as quickly as possible. In daily living, we try to get rid of unpleasant feelings by getting rid of the people who trigger them in us, by trying to get rid of situations, by blaming others instead of looking at the feeling and saying, so, it has arisen. It will stay a while and it will pass again. Nothing remains the same. If I watch it closely enough, I'm using mindfulness rather than reaction. This reaction of ours, trying to keep the pleasant and trying to get rid of the unpleasant, is the reason for our continual roaming around the realm of birth and death, because there's no direction to it. It's a circular movement. We can't get out that way. It is a merry-go-round. It doesn't have a doorway. We go around and around and around trying to keep the pleasant, trying to get rid of the unpleasant, a never-ending circle. The only opening leading out of that merry-go-round is to look at the feeling and not to react. If we learn that in meditation, even for one moment, we can repeat it in daily living to great advantage. Everybody has some unpleasant experiences in his or her life. People say things we don't want to hear. People do things we don't want them to do. People don't appreciate us, love us, praise us. People go away when we want them to stay. People stay when we would like them to go away. It happens to everyone. The Buddha himself was a bust. The Buddha experienced situations that created unpleasant feelings, but he didn't react. There is only attention to the feeling. So when an unpleasant feeling arises in the body because of sitting still for longer than usual, don't blame anything or anyone. There's no one to blame for the feelings that arise. These are just feelings that arise and cease. Watch the feeling and know. Unless you stand back and look at an unpleasant feeling and not dislike it, you will never be able to effect a change. It has to be done once somewhere along the line. This is the ideal situation, to know that the unpleasant feelings are just feelings. They don't need to be owned because they weren't invited by us. We didn't ask for them. Why do we think they are ours? Unless we realize what is going on in our mind, when these feelings arise, we will fall into our old established habit. Patterns over and over again. What we think constantly, what we react to over and over again makes grooves in the mind. Like a muddy driveway on which the car goes back and forth, and the ruts get deeper and deeper, the same thing happens in our mind. The ruts get deeper and deeper until in the end they become so deep it seems impossible to move out of the ruts and to go forward. Here is the right situation, here is an occasion, an opportunity to look at the reaction in one's mind toward unpleasant feelings. Don't rationalize it's bad for me, my blood circulation, I shouldn't do it, the doctor always says nothing like that. Just watch the reaction in the mind. The mind is clever and manipulative. It can do anything. We call it a magician, which is a good word for it. It can pull a rabbit out of any hat. It can rationalize to the point where we are always right and everybody else is wrong. This is something we must learn through meditation that it is impossible to be absolutely right. Most of the time all we are doing is defending a viewpoint, which is based on our own ego. Because we have this ego, the me delusion, all our viewpoints, all our opinions are colored by that. They can't be anything else. It's impossible. If there is a red tinge on the window, everything on the outside looks red. When we get to know our mind and its reactions through the meditative process, we can be more accepting of the fact that while we're thinking one thing, 4 billion other people are thinking something else. How could it be possible that we are right and the other 4 billion are wrong? We are defending a viewpoint, which may at times have validity, but only to the point where it relates to ourselves. The only one who can be totally, completely right is an arahant, who does not have the ego delusion. All these steps are ways to gain insight, to be used not while the mind stays on the breath but while it is reacting to feelings or thinking. Every moment can be used to gain insight and from that calm arises. A bit of insight creates a bit of calm. When we see that we don't need to pay any attention to our thoughts, it becomes easier to drop them. When we see that we don't have to react to feelings, it is much easier to drop the reaction. A bit of calm also creates a bit of insight, and both have to be used. The teaching of the Buddha goes against the current of our own instincts and is not easy to understand. The mind that can grasp it is a mind that has been trained. Ordinary minds usually argue about it. It's just another pastime, it doesn't have any results. To actually experience inside oneself what the Buddha talked about needs a mind that has become calmer and more concentrated than usual, and has seen itself for what it is, just arising and passing phenomena. All this can happen while sitting here and trying to watch the breath. Calm and insight. Insight is the goal. Calm is the means. As long as there is no calm in the mind, there are waves of like and dislike. The waves obscure our vision. One cannot see one's likeness in a pond in which waves are rising high. The water has to become smooth and calm. Likewise the mind has to become smooth and calm, then the vision that arises is clear. We can see with clarity and penetration. Walking meditation is going in exactly the same direction. As we really become mindful and stay on the movement, calm arises. If the thinking process is there, we use it in order to know what goes on in our mind. The labeling is another way to know what one's mind is doing, and if we can label in meditation, we can label in daily living. Any person of goodwill would drop a thought labeled greed or hate. This is the way to purification. Calmness of the mind is dependent upon purification. Purification arises also through insight, through knowing oneself. Labeling shows us what is going on in the mind. In meditation, all labels, all thoughts need to be dropped. In daily living, it is the unprofitable, unskillful thoughts that have to go. Once we learn to do that, purification can take place. FF. The path of purification leads to the end of all swearing. End chapter 3, of 13. Being Nobody, Going Nowhere by Ayya Khema.